In this video, we're going to take a look at how EMDR has the potential to be much more than just a therapeutic method. EMDR is rapidly evolving, and we are going way beyond the standard protocol into the realm of integrated relational therapy. For instance, when you're working with a developmental trauma presentation that's not PTSD, how do you use EMDR effectively and creatively? We'll look at this idea of relational EMDR, and then later in the video, I'll explain how we can get boxed in and what we can do to create the conditions so we can get better outcomes for our clients. I'm going to be sharing some of my best practices that I hope you will find especially useful. So make sure you watch the whole video. Let's look at the potential of EMDR. As you know, the basic training in EMDR is a full 6 days. This provides a solid foundation for the basic method with an introduction to more complicated clinical cases. But it stops there with the recognition that more training is required to work with greater complexity. What happens is that some therapists use EMDR on an ad hoc basis, taking it out of an isolated memory or symptom, but otherwise sticking to what's familiar to them. The other thing that happens is that therapists who are largely working with complex trauma are frequently running aground with just the basic training and are often discouraged by the lack of results. Frankly, EMDR is relatively easy to learn, but surprisingly hard to do. And it's easy to give up without the support and the resolve to stay the course. The way I understand and teach EMDR is different. For me, EMDR is both a methodology and a comprehensive therapy. To address the inherent complexities of working with developmental trauma, we need to include what we already know today that we don't know and didn't know even 5 years ago. That includes constituent elements such as advances in the affective neurosciences, interpersonal neurobiology, attachment theory, parts work, and it's not just a head thing, but it's in the body too. So we need to include the somatic piece as well. So this takes EMDR out of its box into a much larger domain of information and experience from which to draw from. EMDR is still the main frame. It's just a larger frame that incorporates important elements from these other areas. The tricky part of working with EMDR and most therapy methods is that the client's challenges rarely fit into a neat process that is linear or sequential. People with complex trauma form intricate memory networks that resemble the branches of a tree more than they do a timeline. So as you work with clients with EMDR, you'll have a general map, but you may have to take different routes at different times, depending on each client. We also need to understand that the map is not just the actual territory. It's just the map. So this is the hard work of the therapist who has good skills and sensibilities, to also have the flexibility to know how and when to make these clinical choices based on what's needed, to toggle between the big picture understanding and the moment-to-moment demands, to see the direction from the past to the present and from the present to the future, while understanding that the path is not going to be a straight line to get there. As you adopt EMDR as your framework, it informs how you think, what you do and don't do, and how to be with your clients in a way that makes you more adept at navigating this emotional landscape, allowing for possibilities to emerge, and adjusting your course accordingly. I'm reminded of the case example of the woman who was assaulted on the subway that I mentioned in the previous video. whose glasses were broken during the assault. As a byproduct of the processing, she got the insight that, as a child, she was unable to see what was going on around her, which was that her father was really scary. Now that she could see as an adult what she couldn't see as a child, the question then becomes, is it okay to go there? And how do we prepare our clients for the journey so that they're more likely to accept the invitation to approach? EMDR, as it was first developed, served an important function and was perfect for the time. Francine Shapiro, my mentor, bravely went into unknown territory and came up with a radical new treatment and was able to clinically demonstrate the effectiveness of this approach and blaze new trails in the treatment of PTSD. This allowed EMDR to gain the necessary traction despite the controversy and gain credibility to go to the VA hospitals and treat combat veterans and first responders, to mental health agencies and academia. I studied with Francine for many years. I'm so grateful for her life's work and how she's shaping her legacy and the legacy of EMDR therapy for future generations. She's always had a mission that was emboldened by her vision of world peace, that human suffering was largely a result of untreated trauma, and that this methodology had far-reaching implications for helping people all over the world. But these are times that call for us to go beyond what we already know, while at the same time remembering our roots that provide the necessary foundation from which to grow. I'm reminded of a strong willow tree that can bend in many ways during a storm because its roots are deep so that it doesn't break. So the basic procedures are still applicable today, but more often are being applied to a larger, more intricate emotional landscape. I'm inviting you to be part of this larger landscape and to participate in expanding the potential and application of EMDR therapy to serve a bigger function than was previously imagined. For this evolution, we need first to see our biggest blind spot regarding EMDR. I believe that we often miss the opportunity to bring in the relational dimension with our practice. Connecting with our clients in real time, moment to moment. This makes sense if you view EMDR as only a protocol-based treatment, as many do. In a more relational EMDR model, however, the connection between the therapist and the client becomes the vehicle of the work, while at the same time acknowledging and working with the premise that it's the client's neurobiology that's doing the heavy emotional lifting. It changes the game completely. It's for the therapist to use their role, and most importantly, their attuned presence, to facilitate the change that's needed for the client. This is an invitation for therapists and clients to take their work to a much deeper level when both parties are ready and in agreement. It is this relational EMDR approach that I believe will be the future of our field. So what do I mean by relational EMDR? It's a multidimensional approach that is oriented to the relational dimension of the work, helping clients be in better relationship with themselves, in better relationship with us as their therapist, and for us, of course, to be in best relationship with ourselves as we bring our finely tuned instrument to our practice. Relational EMDR is almost a model unto itself, helping us orient to how the client's struggles in the past, in the present, and in the future are not limited to what happens outside the session, but also what is happening in the session. And attending to what's happening in that present moment is the work. So let's take an example. I briefly referred to a client that initiated EMDR therapy with me as a result of her crisis with her previous therapist, who she could not contact for over a month. Let's call her Jen. Jen knew that her early abandonment experiences as a young child were being triggered and thought that EMDR therapy could help with that. What she didn't fully understand was that the solution she wanted to her problem was in fact part of the problem. That is, she wanted the mother she always wanted and never had. And fortunately, to her credit, was honest about that. So, what are the rules of engagement then that inform not just what we're going to be targeting with EMDR, but how are we going to travel together on this journey? How is this client going to feel safe with me and be connected without inadvertently my stepping into her unmet needs as the abandoned child? This is an example of what we need to be asking ourselves as EMDR therapists. How do we travel with our clients? So incorporating the relationship between the therapist and client seeds a new potential in the treatment of attachment trauma with EMDR therapy. It's what creates the space for a new way to relating to oneself, to others, and of course to life itself. For Jen, it's about being in relationship with someone that's journeying with you in an intimate, respectful way, possibly for the first time, while helping them step into the fullness of who they can become now in their lives as an adult, worthy of love and with a healthy sense of self. That's the conversation I'm already having with the therapists that I work with and train. And I believe it's the conversation we all need to be having with ourselves and with one another. When I refer to this unrealized capacity in our work, people get jazzed about it because it's an invitation and an opportunity for tremendous growth, both in what we need to learn as well as develop our capacities to be more present and to use ourselves more mindfully in our work with our clients. You know, one of the main things that can happen when you don't use a more relational approach with a client is that you'll likely reach an impasse with that person. In broad strokes, this may be painful for some therapists to hear, but I can tell you that when therapists feel like they're stuck with a client, they're focused on the client's difficulties rather than considering that the impasse in the work is also about a stuck point in themselves. The therapist dynamic collides with the client's dynamic. You don't have to subscribe to any particular theoretical orientation to appreciate that there are two people in the room interacting with one another on multiple levels of experience. And while this isn't a surprise, it is an invitation to have the conversation about it. We need a venue and a community to turn to so we can normalize these stuck places we all find ourselves in from time to time. Then we can move through them with more grace, greater skill, and much less judgment. So how can we set up the conditions so that we're less likely to hit that impasse in the first place? Let me share with you 3 ideas you can use. The first one is that we need to treat each client as an individual, not as a protocol for them to fit into. A big part of creating the context for the deeper work to happen is to establish what the rules of engagement are going to be right from the start. I refer to that as the work before the work. This invites the relational piece in from the get-go to explore how we're going to be traveling together, both in and out of the office. Most clients come to therapy for symptom relief, and don't know what they don't know and don't know what they need. So the client's readiness is, in part, determined by the conditions we co-create as part of the therapeutic process. How are we going to travel together becomes part of the preparation phase of EMDR therapy. We don't teach that in the basic course, but it's a very important part of the process when treating developmental trauma. This relational stance may contradict the idea that EMDR is a one-size-fits-all protocol with a strict set of rules and best practices. But it is a collaborative effort that communicates both directly and indirectly. We're in this together as a team. So let's go back to Jen. We had to agree that the direction of change we were working towards was to step into the fullness of her adult self, to include her assuming responsibility for her well-being, and that she deserved the very best of care. Part of that path towards that goal, however, meant that she had to be willing to grieve the loss of what she always wanted and will never have, which is a good enough mother. What awaits her, however, is a different kind of relationship, one that's mutual, reciprocal, and in the end, far more satisfying. Yes, this is much more than resolving the early abandonment experiences. So this leads us to the next idea about EMDR as a therapy, not as a tool or a technique for resolving disturbing memories that are generating symptoms. We need to think beyond the goal of EMDR processing as just the resolution of memory. Now, I do understand how rewarding and empowering it is for therapists to feel like they have a power tool in their arsenal of interventions. Many therapists tend to walk away from their EMDR training thinking, oh, I can fix my clients with this. The focus becomes on fixing specific memories rather than seeing these experiences as part of a larger, more intricate fabric that often defines a person's identity, and that their symptoms are only the tip of a much deeper iceberg. Don't get me wrong here, there's nothing wrong with fixing. It's just not the whole story. It does, however, explain why some therapists have a much higher dropout rate with their EMDR clients. Their clients get the quick fix and off they go, not fully appreciating that this can be a portal to healing a much deeper wound. Or in some cases, they land in an emotional territory they didn't have permission to approach. Either way, the invitation and challenge here is to how to help the client begin to relate to their symptoms in the context of a larger story. How do we inspire curiosity about themselves that helps them begin to approach an emotional territory that has been largely unexplored, if not avoided altogether because it's too frightening? What many therapists are eager for, and perhaps what you don't even realize you're hungry for, is using EMDR as a framework for treating complex developmental trauma that is about treating the whole person. So for Jen, it's about helping her step into her capacities as a competent, capable adult, allowing her to have a secure attachment in her life outside the therapy office, while at the same time having the experience of what it's like to be in a secure attachment relationship in the office. So this leads us to the third idea that staying out of the way isn't quite enough in EMDR therapy. The standard protocol of let whatever happens happen is important, but it's not sufficient. When you're dealing with developmental trauma, the absence of the negative doesn't just automatically translate into something positive and adaptive. So what do you do instead? First of all, it's not about what we do instead. It's what we do in addition to allowing the process to unfold. This takes us back to the relational component, because my position is even when you say go with that, or you ask what's happening now, you are still part of the client's experience. There's a parallel process here. We're making memory at the same time we're processing memory. So everything you say and do, and don't say and don't do, becomes part of the client's experience. So when you say go with that, you need to be exquisitely attuned and present to the client's experience and what you're asking them to go with. So I'm offering you an overview of 3 areas that can help you open up to a larger frame of what's possible with EMDR therapy. It's unfortunate that many EMDR therapists walk away from the basic training thinking it's about accessing experience and how it's currently stored. You end up knowing enough to be effective, but perhaps too little to be transformative. I'll say that's part of it. Yes, it is about accessing experience and how it's stored in the brain. But it's also about helping the client have the full emotional response to their experiences for the first time that they couldn't have at that time because the conditions didn't allow for it. So if we go back to Jen, working through her abandonment experiences gives her the opportunity to be angry, to be hurt, to be sad in a way that she couldn't be back then, and ultimately grieving the loss of a childhood that she deserved but never had. So helping your clients create these new experiences in real time, where experience, mastery, and art enter the office. I've devoted myself to fine-tuning my skills and being more actively attuned to each of my clients in this relationship-oriented approach. You can learn from my failures as well as my successes, as I'm hoping to learn from yours. Okay, so we've covered a lot in this video, and I've shared some of what I believe are some important areas we can be talking about in our conversations together. Look out for an email shortly when we release the next video. In that video, I'm going to share how to take your EMDR training to the next level, and I'll be letting you know more about a new online training program and community that will be starting very soon. This program is designed to hold space for your collective insights and discoveries about how we're evolving in our work as EMDR therapists. We'll also share case studies in a safe setting